Thanks for taking the time. For those of you who don't know me, I am Daniel Weisfield, one of the three principals of Three Lake Ventures. Stu, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Stu Cedarleaf, another one of the principals of Three Lake Ventures. Formed this group last year and are excited about what we've started to build.
Absolutely. So we're here today to talk about Project Rebar, which is our real estate arbitrage play in the Bay Area. Before starting out, let me just provide a few disclaimers. You should read all of this in detail, but high-level points. This is only open to accredited investors. None of this is tax, investment, or legal advice. And this is an equity investment, which involves inherent risk. You could lose money. With that, let's provide a little bit of overview on the venture. So a lot of folks on this webinar have invested with Three Pillar Communities in the past. And they probably know me and Yoel as mobile home park guys. By the way, speaking of Yoel, he had a family issue pop up last minute, which is why he's not here. But he sends his best to everybody. So you guys know Three Pillars. You know, our core business is manufactured housing communities. We're a top 50 owner of manufactured housing communities in the US. We have around 80 employees. We're in 10 states. You know, that is a business that we spent a lot of time on, and we love it, and we're going to keep doing it. So this does not signify the end of Three Pillar Communities by any stretch of the imagination. That being said, Yoel and I have been watching the macro trends around industrial real estate for the past few years, and we've been wanting to figure out how we can get in on it. There's a lot of kind of macroeconomic trends which make it a really attractive sector. And we knew we wanted to find the right partner to start doing industrial deals, particularly industrial deals that have a similar flavor to our mobile home park business in terms of maybe being less institutional, more under the radar, maybe they're ugly, and have outsized opportunity to create value. So that was our objective. And then we met Stu a few years ago through the Bay Area real estate community. I got introduced to Stu. I remember we had lunch at a diner in my neighborhood in Oakland probably 3 or 4 years ago, and just started talking. Really respected Stu's background as a real estate professional, very thorough and analytical in his thinking, as well as his character. And all this came together where we decided to form this venture. And we've now closed one deal together and have several more in the pipeline, including this one. So Stu, do you want to talk a little bit more about your professional background?
Sure, thanks, Daniel. So yeah, I've been doing real estate my entire career, kind of broad-based at the beginning where I was doing consulting across all different types of real estate. I spent 5 years at Prologis. That's the largest industrial landlord in the world. Great company, huge company. They do a ton of volume, both leasing, acquisitions, development, you name it. Learned a lot there from a really talented team. But I also wanted to learn mixed use development. So the past few years, that's what I've been doing. And I think the two work well together for opportunities like this, where, you know, industrial outdoor storage by its nature is low improvements. And so there are opportunities to redevelop those properties. And this is one of those opportunities.
Cool. Thank you. So I wanted to provide a snapshot of our team's track record and show you guys that, you know, Stu, one of our three principals, has done billions of dollars of real estate transactions. You know, we included 6 examples here. You know, the first 2 are, you know, billions of dollars worth of deals that Stu did when he was at Prologis, which is the world's biggest industrial real estate company. And then the 4 deals on the right are deals that we've done together as sponsors, you know, entrepreneurially. So the Reese Road truck terminal that you're seeing there is a deal we closed on several months ago. And the other 3 are deals that we have in escrow now. Stu, I think I realized I didn't put a slide in here defining industrial outdoor storage. And I'm sure a lot of the folks on this call will not be familiar with that concept. So maybe you can use this slide as an example to talk through kind of Class A, Class B, Class C industrial and where we're seeing opportunity.
Sure, I'll give a quick overview. So yeah, I mean, the two deals on the left, one is a big portfolio, but the pictures you see there are good examples of, institutional quality distribution centers that have a ton of space in them for high pile storage where you can stack up goods on racks and move them around to forklift trucks and take them in and off of semis. The challenge with those has been that a lot of them don't have adequate trailer parking for trucks. More and more as they get built today, they have more, but a lot of historical, older buildings don't. And the other thing that all the industrial development that I'm sure most people on this call have heard about has done is it's, used up a lot of available industrial land. And so what we're seeing, especially in land constrained areas, is there isn't enough space to store trucks outside. There isn't enough space for contractors to store their materials. There isn't enough space for truck terminals like Reese Road where, you're just moving things from one truck to another very quickly and then shipping it out. And so we see an opportunity in that space to invest in and provide those opportunities and availabilities to contractors, trucking companies, delivery companies, those types of users that really are seeing their areas crowded out both by new development and by ever more restrictive zoning codes, because cities generally don't like these kinds of uses because they're not as pretty as other uses. So we're buying assets with where supply is generally going down, not going up. And as e-commerce and other forms of distribution continue to grow and expand, the demand is only going to grow.
Awesome. Let me just summarize a few of those key points for the benefit of folks on the call. So if you look at the KTR Capital Partners deal on the left, that's a Class A institutional quality industrial property. It's pretty. Amazon might rent it as a tenant, for example. Cities are allowing more of that stuff to get built. It's lower yielding, right? Lower returns because it's more people, it's kind of desirable for institutional investors. And that's not what we're focused on. If you look over here on the right side, let's look at the Woodland deal as an example, where you can see the red outline. That's an example of the type of deal we're targeting. Class B or Class C industrial with an outdoor storage component. You can see here, it's basically a big parking lot where you have zoning to park trucks and trailers. Or a contractor can go store, rebar and equipment and cranes. It's ugly. Cities will not allow any new supply to get built. This is not what cities want. And the supply is shrinking because people are building Class A warehouses on properties like this. We think it's mispriced, and we think there's a lot of opportunity in this space. So just to kind of provide a little more color. So that takes us to our current site in Livermore. Stu, maybe you can talk a little bit about the backstory here and how you sourced this from a family that's owned it for decades. And then maybe we can talk about what makes this an attractive site for an industrial tenant.
Sure. So yeah, I live in this area. I live in the East Bay, just a little bit north of Livermore. And I've been working with a couple of brokers in this area for a few years. And basically, they've been hunting for opportunities like this for me. And in that process, we've looked at, a lot of properties for a lot of different purposes. And they knew that this site could be available and were able to get us a tour and a meeting with the sellers directly. The sellers, it's four families. They bought the site back in the 80s and ran a rebar company there for many years. Rebar companies, they bring in the bars, they cut them to the right length, bend them into the right shape, and then send them off to construction sites where they get concrete poured on them and reinforce that concrete. Great example of industrial outdoor storage, because they have a big need for it. They sold that business in the early 2000s, but owned the land and leased it back to the company they sold it to for quite a few years. That company moved on in 2021, and so today they're ready to sell it. So we were lucky enough to get this site under control without it being fully marketed to the whole universe, and we feel really good about that, and have a good relationship with the sellers. But more than that, when I toured it, you look at it, and I thought, hey, we're looking at a big industrial outdoor storage site, which it's great for, which we'll cover in a second. But it's also, next, directly adjacent to a train station and across the railroad tracks from a nice park with a cool BMX track, and across the road from existing residential. And so we thought, hey, this should really be a residential site someday. And so, that's the broader play here. But in the meantime, this is a great industrial outdoor storage site as it is. You can kind of see the numbers here on the aerial. It's got a huge open yard space in the front that you can store trucks, equipment, etc. It's got a 54,000 square foot warehouse with 4 working cranes, high clear height up to 40 feet at the highest point, about 24 feet high to the where the cranes are. It's got 8,000 square feet of office space, and secured, fenced site with really good access to Interstate 580, which would take you from here to the Port of Oakland, or going the other direction out to the Central Valley and on to the rest of the country. And this is a core Bay Area location, so there aren't very many sites like this. It's very supply constrained, very built out, and so there's been a lot of interest in this property.
Let's pause there, Stu. We got a question from the audience from my colleague Kurt Kelly, who's a leader in the mobile home industry. He asked, why did the sellers sell this off market? Why wouldn't they have hired a real estate broker in order to maximize their sale price?
Well, I think they had some other interest. We weren't the only group at the table. So they were, at least talking to a couple of groups, and their lawyer has kind of acted as their broker to a certain extent. So, he might be getting a little payment specifically tied to the price. But ultimately, we were picked not because we had the highest price, but because, we met with the sellers and they trusted us and thought we could perform and do this the right way. And they've told me that. And so that's why we find ourselves here today. We also are offering to close relatively quickly compared to, say, a residential developer who would take 3 years to close. And ultimately, the families that own this property are getting older. They're all retired now. Some of them have been retired since they sold the business, and are looking to be done with this property and move on. So I think it's kind of a combination of those 3 things.
Well, I want to talk about the market dynamics here a bit with regards to just the industrial use case. So, by the way, you can see we're the storyline here is building towards residential redevelopment, but we want to start out by making the case for why this works as an industrial deal. And the reason is supply and demand. So people love to hate the Bay Area. And as a Bay Area native, I understand that. So you've got lots of folks who love to bash California and its anti-business policies and all sorts of stuff. But the numbers don't lie. There's a $500 billion economy in the Bay Area. I think I've heard that if the Bay Area were a country, it would be like the 17th biggest economy in the world. 4 million jobs. And on top of that, you've got the Port of Oakland, which is a top 3 port for US trade with Asia. Number 1 and number 2 are LA and Long Beach, which is basically one combined port. So this is essentially, the 2nd biggest port for US Asia trade. So all of that creates, a really robust consumer economy with very high income and education levels, as well as making the Bay Area and the East Bay a supply chain hub for the whole US economy. On top of that, you've got these macro trends going on that we're all aware of. If you're buying, duct tape these days, or, a keyboard, I need to get a keyboard for my daughter who's 7, you're probably not going to Main Street, the mom and pop store. You're probably looking at Amazon or an Amazon competitor, right? We're all aware of that trend, and all of that is driving massive demand for last mile delivery. And all of those Amazon delivery vans that show up at your house need to park somewhere and they need to get their goods somewhere, right? And so all of that is creating kind of a macro trend that requires last mile distribution, which is industrial real estate. And there's a trend towards onshoring and reshoring because of the supply chain disruptions that we're all familiar with during COVID. And the CHIPS Act, which just passed in Congress, will be a big multi-billion-dollar boost for US manufacturing. And so we're actually seeing at this site interest not only from storage and logistics type users, but also some manufacturing type users who need space. So there's really robust demand. And on the supply side, cities are not creating a lot more industrial zone real estate, particularly not in infill locations, close to customers, close to jobs. And you're actually seeing a loss of existing supply as sites like this get redeveloped into Class A warehouses. So all of that kind of is the macro picture for what's driving demand for the site. And what that's led to is really robust leasing activity, like remarkably robust leasing activity. So Stu, you want to talk through the kind of interest we've gotten?
Yeah, so we've been lucky in that the sellers have allowed us to market this property for lease while we're in escrow. Usually you can't do that. So we're very pleased with what we've seen. There's been many thousands of people that have looked at the listings online or opened the brochure. We've had 38 direct inquiries from brokers. We've had 6 tours. That's actually more like 7 or 8 now, because we've had a couple more since this presentation was released. 3 letters of intent and 5 groups that are currently interested. Just over the weekend, we responded to a request from Volvo Construction Equipment. So, a large multinational company that wants to relocate here because they can better retain their employees, and because a lot of them come from the Central Valley, and it's a much cheaper site than the core close to Port of Oakland locations, which is where they're located now. So, they could take as much as half of the site and be a really strong tenant for us. We've also got a handful of other companies that want to either store equipment or park trucks out there. So, the activity, given where we're at in this process, has been really strong, and it's a testament to how little supply of this type of property there is in the core Bay Area.
I just want to do a quick check-in here. Number one is I want to make sure folks can see the slides and aren't just listening on audio. So if any of you guys can type in the chat box of the Q&A and just, give me a quick thumbs up or a yes that people are seeing the slides, that would be helpful. And I also want to encourage folks, let's make this interactive. As you have questions, go ahead and type them in chat or Q&A. Good, I'm getting yeses here, perfect. And we'll answer questions as we go, right? So it's not just a monologue. Cool, thanks guys. I'm seeing the yeses here, so it sounds like people are seeing the slides.
Good deal.
Cool. So in conclusion, this site works as an industrial deal, even if we don't get redevelopment to happen. And I just want to emphasize, a site like this is rare, right? It's not every day that you see, a 10-acre industrial site in a great Bay Area location, nice fencing,
Right.
half a mile from the 580 freeway. It has heavy power. It has overhead cranes. I mean, this site is like plug and play for an industrial user. Bum, bum, bum. But there's a twist. So it's great for industrial use, but if we can get it rezoned for residential use, we can create really disproportionate upside. And I just want to run you through a few facts and figures here. So there are more than 8,000 high-tech jobs within a 1-mile radius of this site. A lot of those are at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, which is a center of high-tech innovation backed by federal dollars, not by VCs, right, which is more fickle, but backed by, the US taxpayer. So those jobs aren't going away. Those are kind of research and development type jobs. And then around Lawrence Livermore, there's a whole ecosystem of suppliers and spin-offs and laboratories and startups. There's kind of a robust ecosystem, and we're a mile from it. And those are, engineers and software developers and physicists and folks who make very substantial incomes. So the median household income in Livermore is $170,000. The median home price is $1.2 million. And we're not talking about a fancy house. We're not talking about a mansion with a swimming pool. That's, a middle of the road home, a starter type home, probably 3-bed, 2-bath, and needs some work. For all of those reasons, Livermore has realized it needs more housing in order to house, its employees and its citizens. And they're looking for places that have the appropriate characteristics to get rezoned for housing, and they have picked our site. So in 2025, the city of Livermore plans to rezone our site for residential use. That's a big deal because normally as a developer, you're kind of trying to twist a city's arm to give you residential rezoning. In this case, the city's already said they're going to do it, and that's on public record, and that will save us a lot of time and a lot of money and reduces a lot of the risk here. Stu, anything to add there?
No, there was a question, how long would the industrial leases be that we take today? We're targeting 3 to 5 years with no extension options so that it dovetails with the residential strategy.
And Stu, I know we've discussed this a few times. Can you explain why tenants are happy to sign a 3 to 5 year lease and aren't demanding something longer than that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's mostly a function of supply and demand, where there aren't a lot of other options, and so people will take what they can get. Also, generally, folks are looking at a 5-year runway on these deals, and I think the normal lease term would be 5 years, and then they would have an extension option that they can exercise. So in this case, we just wouldn't include that option. So, we've had some folks that have come in and said that they want it for 10 years, and we've entertained that, but generally we've told everybody that we're focused on 3 to 5.
Cool. We got another question here saying, were the sellers aware of the rezoning potential when they made the deal with us?
Yes. So the city of Livermore has been eyeing this site for some time for reasons that we'll get into shortly. So they're aware that that's an option, and they're also aware that it's driving their value here. So they know it, but they don't want to do it. They want to be done. They want to sell it and be out. And then I don't think they know that the city has actually released their draft alternatives for the site that show it being rezoned for residential. So that's a new development that's just happened in the last few months that we're taking advantage of.
Yeah, let me just put a finer point to that. And this is a testament to Stu. Stu had been circling on this site off market, cultivating a relationship with this family. Knowing that this could be a really high potential site for residential redevelopment, we got the site tied up, and like 6 weeks later, the city of Livermore released its proposed general plan update showing the rezoning of this site. So it was kind of instantly that was a chunk of value that was created after we had gotten the site into contract at our purchase price.
Yep. And along those lines, another question, did the other bidders also expect to change the use to residential? Yes. There have been also industrial users that have wanted to buy the site, but the folks that were there at the end were also looking at residential. But we're not competing anymore. This deal's under contract and we have control.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a quick overview here of why this site should be a residential site. So it works for industrial. We talked about, the industrial leasing activity and why an industrial user would love to use it. But if you look at this aerial map and you put your real estate investor, glasses on, this is not a typical industrial site, right? A typical industrial site would be in an industrial part of town, often, quote unquote, on the wrong side of the railroad tracks, lots of barbed wire around junkyards, and you got potholes in the street for all the heavy truck traffic, right? That's kind of a stereotypical industrial deal. What you're seeing here is not that. This is a 10-acre heavy industrial site that is next door to a commuter rail station, across the street from a really nice city park, and across the street from nice recent residential development, townhomes and apartments, which were done by KB Homes. So, you can see that kind of the path of growth has already come to this area, and it makes a lot of sense to continue building residential here, particularly because it's so close to Lawrence Livermore Lab, which is a big jobs driver. And I think that's so this here is showing the rail line, where connecting our site to jobs in workers in the Central Valley, as well as jobs in Silicon Valley, and there's a BART connection to San Francisco. And that's what the city saw when they decided that in their general plan to change the site's use to residential. So, Stu, do you want to talk through this a bit, and then we can maybe answer some of the questions after that?
Sure. Yeah. So the city's going through their general plan update, which every city in California does on a periodic basis. And as part of that, they are increasing their land that's zoned for residential. California has a chronic housing shortage, and the state has really challenged the cities to zone for more housing. They can't produce the housing, right? It's a private market, but they can zone for more of it. And this site is an obvious site because of the proximity to the rail and other homes. There's another area here that you can kind of see where it's the brown sections where they might someday build another commuter rail station. But that area, even if it gets rezoned, is many years away because the commuter rail doesn't exist yet, whereas our site is ready to go. So we've talked to the city about it. They're excited that a buyer wants to do residential here on a site that, of course, has been industrial for a very long time. And, they're willing to work with us. So, these three alternatives here, one is high density and the other two are medium density. We will advocate for our project towards the medium density, and that will allow us to do a mix of townhomes and apartments, which we think will maximize the value of the land. And, along the way, we'll be there with the city and in public comment and all of that, talking about this property and making sure that we're participating in that process to our advantage. There's a city council meeting on Monday to actually review and approve these land use alternatives. So we'll be watching that closely.
Cool. So I think we just answered Kurt's question about what type of housing would be built here.
Yeah, and we've got a really, really high level site plan that's in the deck that we'll take a quick look at too.
Yeah. So it's townhomes and apartments. Then I got a question from Debbie Schlegel. I need to give a shout out to Debbie. Debbie is the real estate agent who sold me the first house I ever bought with my wife, Atara, in 2009. So Debbie, I give you credit for getting me started on my path in real estate. Thank you so much for being here and joining this webinar with us. I'm thrilled. Debbie asked about, is there concern about environmental testing prior to the residential build? We have a whole slide discussing the environmental status of the site, which we have, researched in detail, and we'll discuss that shortly. Daniel Luskin asked, why wouldn't residential high density give more value? And do you have a preference about these to be next to the site? So Stu, do you want to talk through that?
I'll handle that one because it is counterintuitive. I just like to say these questions are really good. You guys know your stuff. So California has astonishingly high construction costs, and as a result, it has astonishingly high for sale home values. And so you put those two together, the type of residential development in suburban locations like this that actually maximizes the land value is townhomes. And if you think about it, townhomes are inexpensive to build, right? It's stick built, low rise construction. And so what that means, and then you can sell them for a very strong price, let's say $1 million and up. And so if you think about it, the net result is that the more money is available to pay for land. Whereas if you do dense apartments, you have to build usually a large concrete foundation called a podium, and you have to build higher into the air, which requires additional safety features that increase your costs. And all of the labor, of course, in California is very expensive because, they got to live here too. And so at the end of the day, what actually maximizes value is townhomes. And having medium density apartments here, like we'll show you, like in our case, which is what we're proposing is a wrap. Here it is, where you've got apartments wrapping around a parking structure, allows us to meet the affordability requirements for the property in a way that is cost effective, and then allows us to maximize the amount of land that's available for townhomes. So we're kind of trying to find that balance of, yes, there's density here, like that apartment building you see to the south will be a big apartment building, but it leaves a lot of land available for townhomes.
Daniel also asked, do you have a preference about the adjacent uses to our site? And are we advocating at all, probably as the city goes through its process?
Yeah, so we do. So you can kind of see to the west here of the property, there's an industrial building, a warehouse pretty close to the property line. And in at least one of the alternatives, this area would get rezoned to kind of a industrial / commercial, which will allow more consumer focused uses in the area. So you could see, like, just making up an example, like a brewery or a winery or something like that. This is right by Livermore, wine country. And, if we could see some more retail friendly uses in here that would improve the neighborhood, that would be great. So our preference would be to see this area be not just pure industrial anymore, but to have a commercial aspect as well. There was also a question about the capital raise required for townhomes and apartments being built. At this time, we're anticipating that we entitle and sell the land, that we don't plan to build it ourselves. So there wouldn't be one.
So let me answer my friend Jan's question. He said, if townhomes maximize the land value, why are we not doing 100% townhomes? It's a great question. So let me try and explain some of the competing dynamics here. So the city wants to build more housing, right? That's good for society. And the state of California is pushing every city in California to zone more land for housing. And every city has a housing production target that they're trying to meet. And so the city has identified this site as, high potential for housing, and they're going to rezone it. And their goal is to get as many units as possible. On the other hand, there's economic reality of what developers can afford to pay for land and construction while still leaving enough profit margin to make a project like this economic for the developer. And that's a tension, because the city might come in and say, hey, this is going to be, we only want this to be super high density. We're going to zone this for 1,000 units. Anyone who comes in here and is going to need to build a high rise. And if that's what they did, the thing would probably never get built, right? No developer is going to come in here and spend the money to build, a 40-story tower. The rents that they're going to get won't justify it, and it won't be an economic project. So that's and the developers would love for it to be all townhomes. That's what they're going to maximize money. But then the city doesn't get enough housing units, and they don't get enough rental housing units, right? It's all going to be a for sale product, and they want some rental stuff that's more accessible for people at different stages of life. So that's the push and pull that we're in. And the city is going to create a requirement that gives them enough density to meet their social goals, while still being economic enough for developers to go build it.
Yep. I asked for that. I asked for a lower density that would allow 100% townhomes. They said they're not going to do it.
Yeah. So all that being said, we have home builders and developers who want this site. And I wanted to create this slide to show that it's not just, we're not speaking theoretically about potentially selling the site to a home builder. We already have expressions of interest from some of the most qualified buyers in the market. So Stu, can you talk through this process a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So KB Home built the development that's on the other side of Vasco Road that you could see in the aerial. So they're very familiar with the area and would love to build it. They actually approached the sellers of the land saying, hey, give us 3 years to get it entitled. We'll pay you a whole bunch of money for the site. TrueMark is a local builder that operates in Northern and Southern California. Great townhome builder, perfect fit for the townhome piece. They have expressed interest to me. And then, we've had good interest from a major apartment developer as well. And then on the right side, you can see these are other home builders that are very active in the Bay Area and would be logical fits for this property. So, there's 2 ways to approach this redevelopment, which we'll get into. One is we could do it ourselves, entitle it ourselves, get it approved ourselves, and go sell it. The other is we can partner with a group like this and let them go through the approval process and get exactly what they want.
So Jan asked a really good follow-up question. I want to go back to this slide. So Jan asked, is there a risk that the city will zone in a way that makes it uneconomic for us? Or has the density of the residential zoning already been decided? And the answer there is coming back to this slide. These 3 alternatives, are publicly available and published by the city. The city has kind of telegraphed their intentions, and they've said that the 3 alternatives they're considering are these 3. And they've quantified the mix between high density and medium density use in each of these 3 alternatives. Now they're going through a public participation process where we will weigh in, and developers will weigh in, and housing advocates will weigh in, and neighbors will weigh in, and they'll go through that democratic process and figure out which of the alternatives they pick. But kind of the universe of choices is pretty clear.
Yep, and the high density 60 to 100 units. I mean, I've already told the city that we don't think that would work. So we're advocating for the 30 to 60. But just so you know, the apartment design that you see on our preliminary site plan, that density for that just apartment piece is about 65 units per acre. So if we had to do a 10-acre wrap apartment site, it would be economically feasible, but it wouldn't be as advantageous as what you see here. So that's what we mean when we say we've got to advocate, and we will continue to do that through the general plan process.
Sorry, guys, I would not normally respond to something on a webinar, but that was a sensitive family thing. Okay, so we talked through buyer interest in the site, and I just want to frame it here really high level. We see this as an arbitrage opportunity. We're buying what will be residential land at an industrial price. And there is a pretty clear path to getting it entitled for residential use, which would generate 16 to 22% annualized returns for our investors. So let's talk through what that path looks like. And if there's one slide that summarizes the whole deal, it's this slide. This slide is the deal in a nutshell. We're buying the site. We plan to lease it short term to an industrial user. And then there are three paths. The first path is the upside case, where we entitle it for residential use ourselves. With lawyers, with political consultants, with environmental consultants, right? With a whole team, not just me and Stu, but we don't have a buyer in mind. We don't have a buyer identified until we have gotten all the approvals. And then once we have all the approvals, we can hand that, on a silver platter with a bow on it to the market and say, hey, KB Homes, hey, TrueMark, hey, developers, come compete. Let's do an auction and pay us your best price for this pretty rare thing, which is an entitled residential site in an awesome Bay Area location. So that is the way that we can maximize our exit price on the site, but it also entails market risk, right? Because we think we'll get these entitlements in roughly 2025, maybe 2026. And the price developers pay in 2025 or 2026 is unknown to us today. So that takes us to our base case. Our base case, which is more like a 16% IRR, involves partnering with a home builder earlier in the process. Basically, later this month, shopping the site to that same set of potential home builder buyers and saying, hey, we'll bring you in early. If you want to agree on a price now and pay us an option payment now and regular recurring milestone payments every few months, then you will be our partner. You will have input into the design process to make sure we're designing exactly what you want. And you have, a guaranteed option, an exclusive right to buy the site once it's fully entitled. That reduces risk for us because it locks in our exit price. It'll also take some of the upside off the table. And then finally, our downside case is a 9% IRR. And that scenario says, hey, we lease the site to an industrial tenant. We spend 3 years and $2 million doing all the stuff that's needed for the pursuit of residential entitlements. We do all the environmental mitigation. We spend all the money on attorneys and political consultants. And ultimately, the city says, no, we don't think that's going to happen. If we thought that was going to happen, we wouldn't be pursuing this deal, but it's possible. And if that happens, we could absorb that $2 million of pursuit costs as a sunk cost, sell the site just as an industrial site, and still generate a 9% IRR for investors based on all of our projections, which we're happy to share. Debbie Schlegel asked, would it make sense to consider a land lease for 100 years for the builders? This would maintain the land ownership while collecting a monthly fee per unit. I don't know that this happens again.
I love the idea because there's a big movement afoot to do more land leases in the commercial real estate world for just that reason. They're not making any more land in these infill locations like the Bay Area. The challenge is that then home ownership becomes difficult. So, like using TrueMark as an example, because I've done a bunch of consulting work for them, I know them really well. They wouldn't do a for sale product on a ground lease in a location like this. If it was truly irreplaceable, Newport Beach coastline, something like that, they would consider it, Santa Monica. But in a location like this, they wouldn't consider it. And having that for sale component is what maximizes value. Having said that, I think it's a great idea, and it's certainly worth kicking the tires on before we lock ourselves into something. We're entrepreneurial. I'd be open to it, but it generally moves you from the for sale to the for rent bucket in this location. And generally that's going to decrease your implied land value.
So this is just a visual depiction of those three scenarios we just laid out. Basically, we're buying the site for $19 million. We think in a downside scenario, we sell the site, as an industrial site for $30 million. And if we get an entitlement for residential, we think those sale prices will range from the mid 30s to the mid 40s, depending on whether we partner with a home builder early or take more risk and sell it later. One question I've gotten that I want to address is, what explains the delta between our $19 million purchase price and our $30 million sale price if the site remains in industrial use? Right? It's already industrial. So where is that delta coming from? I think the real answer there is this site has been owned by a mom and pop type, family for the past 40 years. They've operated their own business on it. They've never leased it, right, in 40 years at market rates. And so we are now going through a market leasing process. There's lots of demand for the site. Industrial real estate it's a tight market. There aren't a lot of sites like this. We think we're going to get, much higher rents than the sellers probably ever imagined. And once we have those rents locked in place, there are buyers who will come pay $30 million for a site like this because they're getting a very stable recurring revenue stream.
Agreed.
Do anything to add here?
I would just add that the wind's at our back in the industrial market as well. We're talking about selling this thing in 5 or 6 years. You'd be hard pressed to find a prognosticator that would say industrial rents will be lower in 5 years than they are today.
Fair enough. So let's talk through environmental, a big question everyone has. So the headline here is half the site is totally clean. It's already been blessed by the state water board. We can build residential on it. The work has been done. The other half of the site has had extensive remediation over the years, and there's a little bit left that needs to be done, which involves removing some low-level VOCs, volatile organic compounds, from underneath the soil. The state has already approved a plan for us to do that. We'll start implementing that plan immediately upon closing. It will take roughly 3 years, a little under $1 million to execute. We've got, our consultant already lined up to do that work, and it's built into our budget and built into our timeline. So I think kind of one of the high-level story here is, half the site's ready to go, half the site has some minor issues, and it's not the kind of thing that scares a home builder away. In a market like the Bay Area, where it's hard to find sites with residential land use approval, home builders are used to dealing with this kind of stuff. And on the scheme of environmental issues, this is not a nuclear waste dump. This is not a major threat to human health. There's a little bit of VOCs, in the water, which need to get cleaned up.
And that's, well, the main contamination that's still there, most of it's gone, has been cleaned up, is over 60 feet down. So this is a groundwater issue. It's not a human health issue. Groundwater is important to the state of California for obvious reasons, but this groundwater isn't being used for anything today. So it's very speculative. Still needs to be done, still part of the process, but the usual, like, if we dig up the dirt, is it going to make someone sick? That is not the case here. The other thing we'll do is the state encourages people to redevelop these sites through the Brownfield Act. Obviously, an infill site next to a train station is something the state would like to see redeveloped. And so they have ways that you can enter into agreements with the state that basically says, in exchange for proceeding with the cleanup and the redevelopment, they'll limit your environmental liability. The agreement's called a CLERA agreement. The law is called the Brownfields Act. We'll pursue that. We'll get it as part of our closing process, and that'll further limit our liability. And that agreement is transferable to the next buyer. So that's very appealing to the home builders as well. And as you can see, I mean, we've got a full budget for this. We're not taking a guess. We've already evaluated the site. We've estimated what we think it would cost in a worst case scenario to remediate it. And the worst case scenario is carried here. And we're carrying an extra 100 grand or 86 grand of contingency. So we know what we're getting into. We know how to protect ourselves. And
let me just add 2 things there. So if folks are interested in environmental and want to, review the documents in our plan, you're very welcome to do that. There's a Dropbox link there at the bottom, or just email us and we'll share the underlying documents with you. Daniel Luskin asked what originally caused the contamination. And the answer is, before this was a rebar site, I think back in the 50s or the 60s, there were rail cars on site which got cleaned using some sorts of solvents or chemicals to clean rail cars. And there was no EPA requirements back then. Some of that splashed into the dirt and then went down to the soil.
Yep. And the site has been worked on over literally 30 years up to this point. So, even though the current sellers didn't contaminate it, they have worked to clean it up. And that's what's led us to the point we're at today.
Kurt asked, what's our equity to debt ratio? Kurt, just hang on a sec and we'll show you our sources and uses. You're anticipating our slides by about 2 minutes here. So a really high level, let's just summarize why we like the deal. So it's a turnkey industrial facility. It's very rare to find a 10-acre site, tons of outdoor storage, right off 580. It has a rail spur, it has an office, it has heavy power. It's lots of stuff that's highly attractive to an industrial user. And it's got this redevelopment opportunity, which we've discussed. The city wants to see housing here. And we feel like it's an arbitrage play where the upside case is extremely attractive and the base case is just fine. Right? I feel very comfortable with it. I don't think the base case will materialize, but if it does, I feel very comfortable investing my money and my family's money in this deal. So that's a really high level. Let's talk through the capitalization summary. I'll kind of, Stu, if you don't mind, I'll just go through this quickly. Maybe you can add some color. So roughly $19 million purchase price, $23.5 million total investment. That's raising enough cash for us to pay closing costs and have some initial cash on hand to start the environmental and rezoning process. Capital structure is $11.5 million in equity, of which Stu and I and our families are putting in $500,000. And then $12 million in loan proceeds from a lender. We have LOIs from multiple lenders at this point, and that is kind of actively under negotiation. The acquisition debt will be what we call bridge debt, fairly expensive at an 8.5% rate, because the site is not currently leased. As soon as this site is leased up to an industrial tenant, we can then bring on a more conventional, bank or credit union, institutional type lender, and get, a more normal interest rate, probably in the 5 to 6% range in this environment. Stu, anything to add there?
No, that covers it.
Great, cool, guys. Keep the questions coming. We appreciate you guys all making it interactive. So just a quick summary here of investment terms. This deal will pay a 7% preferred return to folks who invest less than $500,000. If you invest $500,000 or more, it'll pay you an 8% annual return on your money. We as sponsors don't participate in profits until you've gotten paid that money. And if we're not paying it out currently, then it will accrue. So it will get paid out upon a liquidity event. Once you've gotten that preferred return on your capital, we then split cash flow 50-50. 50% to the investors and 50% to us as the sponsor. In our base case, we anticipate a roughly 16 to 17% IRR net to investors. Doing a little less than doubling your investment over a 4-year period. This is an illiquid investment. Assume a 4-year hold, but we have discretion to hold it longer or shorter based on our business judgment. We pay distributions quarterly by direct deposit. We pride ourselves in our investor reporting. If you're an existing investor, I hope you would tell your friends that we do a really good job providing detailed quarterly reports on time, with both a narrative about how the property is doing as well as profit and loss and financial statements. And we get K1s out to investors by the end of March. Got another question here. When would you expect distributions to start? Stu, do you want to address that? And I'll see if I've got the chart pulled up here that quantifies that. Let me see here.
Yeah, the distributions would be more limited on this deal than a typical deal because we're going to use the income from the property to pay for the remediation costs. So you can kind of see here that, you know, the cash flow after paying for the entitlement costs is relatively limited. So we wouldn't expect much in the way of distributions until the entitlements have been approved.
Yeah.
So a little bit different in that respect, but of course, you're investing it back into the property by you're using the money to create value through the re-entitlement process.
Exactly. But if, you know, in our downside case, if at any point we come to the conclusion that residential redevelopment is not feasible, then we'll have a cash flowing industrial tenant. We can start paying out distributions to investors while we market and sell the property in an industrial use.
Good point.
So I just want to, we've got a couple more questions here, which is great. Nick asks, Stu, can you talk about similar projects you've worked on that inform the investment thesis here?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So yeah, I mean, this is my backyard. My focus for the last few years has been primarily Bay Area mixed-use development, and I've seen quite a few of these deals. We're trying to give the city what they want while also giving developers what they want. And so I've worked on a number of deals where you've split the site like this into an apartment component that delivers the density and the affordability, and a townhome component that delivers the high land value and the for sale product that home builders want. Worked on projects like this in Santa Clara, worked on them in San Ramon, and, you know, have done also just standalone apartment projects in the Bay Area. And what you see, of course, is that you need that balance, that matching of the density of the site, of the project, which then drives the construction costs of the project. That needs to match with the rents that people are willing to pay in that area. And so we're trying to be careful not to overdo it here. You know, for example, we could do a more dense apartment project on this site that would generate more units. And generally say, hey, more units means more land value, right? But because construction costs are so high, if you can't get high enough rents to justify it, your land value will actually go down. And so that's why we're willing, you know, to have a little bit more land set aside for apartments in order to allow us to build something that's gonna cost less money, and then more, you know, should flow down to the bottom line of the land value.
Stu, I think that's a really thorough explanation of how you think about the apartment versus townhome mix and how you've done that in other projects. Maybe even at a higher level, can you talk about other redevelopment projects you've done where you bought industrial and turned it into another use, or just generally changed land use and went through an environmental process and a process with the city?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've you know, I've had a few different stops in, you know, in my career. And, you know, when I was at Prologis, we sold land to developers to build mixed use communities. Good example of that would be Facebook. We sold them all their land in Menlo Park. That is now going to be their big community. Then on the flip side, on the mixed use development side, you know, I was part of the redevelopment efforts at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, and then a few, you know, individual projects throughout the Bay Area in places like Berkeley, Pleasant Hill, and San Ramon. So, we've gone through the entitlement process several times. We know what it takes, and we know who is best positioned to help us. Architects, civil engineers, land use attorneys, those kinds of folks.
So Daniel Luskin asked another good question here. I'm going to flip down to the 3 development scenarios. Can the city make you build more units than the developer proposes, up to the maximum under the zoning? What discretion will the city have once the new general plan is in place?
So, really good question, particularly for California. Historically, you could send them you could submit a compliant project to the city and they could still reject you. That isn't really the case anymore because those kinds of things happen frequently and stopped a lot of housing from getting built. And the state has recognized this and passed several laws that streamline the approval process and effectively say, if you submit a proposal for housing that meets the city's criteria, yeah, they can make tweaks to your design and offer suggestions and things like that, but there isn't a ton that they can do to just outright reject a compliant project. So we would use those state laws to our advantage. And basically, if you propose let's say it gets medium high density zoning, which is what we expect, as long as what we propose is between 30 and 59 units per acre and complies with their other, design requirements, it should be a slam dunk.
Thank you.
And by the way, we'll say, this is getting really technical, but when we submit the application, we would say, this is an SB 330 application. And that's going to notify everybody that we think that it's a compliant project and it qualifies for a more streamlined approval.
Just kind of wrapping up here, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I think we're actually at the 1 hour mark now. So we'll wrap up in the next couple minutes. If you've got any more questions, please type them in. Just real quick, I want to show you that we have a real entitlement environmental budget. We're not just winging it here with contingency. Our projections are based on recent comparable land prices for both entitled apartment land and entitled townhome land. We can discuss this in much more detail if you'd like. There are risk factors here. This is an equity investment. You could lose money. It involves real estate risk, entitlement risk, there's environmental risk, all sorts of things that can happen in a private real estate deal. Is this a good fit for you? You need to be an accredited investor. It's e-liquid. You need to be comfortable getting your K1s, in March. If you need more advance notice than that, then this would not be a good fit for you. And you need to be okay with some risk. And finally, next steps and how to invest. We're accepting reservations now. They're still non-binding. And if you'd like to make a non-binding reservation to indicate your interest, go to our investor portal. You'll see the link there on the right-hand side, and you can submit a reservation there. So we do have a few more questions. Someone asks, about our investment minimum. Our investment minimum is $50K. That's smaller than most sponsors. We love letting investors in at smaller amounts and building a relationship, improving our value. Robin Brinkeross asked, how much do you have committed to raise to date? I think last I checked, which was around Friday, we were at 6 million, excluding what my family's putting in and excluding a bunch of other soft commitments that were kind of circling around. So I think if I tally it all up, we're probably around 8 million out of the 11.5 that we need. Any other questions? Okay, guys, well, it's been an hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have more questions, email us, let us know. Investorrelations@threepillarcommunities.com is the best way to get in touch. Thank you for joining us. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.